Welcome back to the Pushing Through Loss podcast, where we share stories, honor resilience, and embrace strength. I am Kalila Green Siciliano, and it is my honor to begin the journey with you. Thank you so much for joining me. Today I have Tansy, who comes, I think, from New Zealand, right?
That's correct. Yes.
So a pretty far distance, and I'm so excited to have somebody who's like literally halfway around the world who is, thrilled to have you on because I know I'm sure your story is also equally interesting to hear, but I don't really get to talk to many people from New Zealand. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's great to talk.
Yeah.
Mm.
Right before we started recording, you said that you had signed up for an interview a long time ago. And it was something obviously that caught your attention in one of the Facebook groups. So tell me a little bit about why you decided you wanted to come on.
Mm. I think for me, when you talk about like loss and grief and those, I think for me, my husband and I were unable to have children, and we had a long journey of trying to have children and trying to adopt children. And I think um, often we don't talk about a loss of something we never had. Like it's not necessarily recognized that trying to have children and being unsuccessful. But even for, a lot of people that I know that haven't had children for other reasons, whether it's circumstance or sexual orientation or some other reason, that we don't really talk about that feeling of loss that
Mm,
people might have, even though they never had children, maybe they never even tried. But there's always going to be that, oh, everyone else has got children, or, people are doing certain, there's Mother's Day and there's Christmases. And I think just for me, it was um, interested in how we don't necessarily acknowledge something you never had as potentially a loss
mm.
and the grief that can come with that as well.
It's so
Mm.
interesting that you think about it that way because when I first had the miscarriage, I was 16 weeks along. So I felt like I almost like I had no right to be upset. Number one, I was a surrogate, so it wasn't even my own
Mm-hmm.
child. But also, it was like, how far along do you have to have that right? And then somebody else in this group that I was a part of that was really a very therapeutic and healing kind of group was there because she had an ectopic pregnancy. And then I thought,
Mm-hmm.
I'm judging myself. And yet there are so many people exactly like what you just said that you're mourning the loss of something that you're not sure what it is, but you do see what it is. You do have that idea from other people. You know the tangible effect from it, whether it's your decision or not, it's still not there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I think that's sometimes the thing is like, I think as a childless couple, you get unsolicited advice,
Right.
and like, did you not want to have children, and why don't you have children? And I'm approaching that age where people can look at me and go, oh, okay, well, that door's closed, but for
Oh.
many years, you've got this sort of like, oh, haven't you thought about it? You better hurry up, or have you not thought of IVF, or have you not thought of adoption? And you get unsolicited advice. And I think because it's sort of almost like the default that people would have children. And I think when people see someone without a child, it's almost, you get this unsolicited advice of you should and how you should, and not acknowledging potentially what someone is going through, or maybe how hard it was to have the decision not to have children, or not to go down a path that was difficult or emotional, or there's traumatic associations. Like there's just so many things that I think we don't acknowledge
Mm.
in society, and it can really hurt, with what some people say, that they're trying to be helpful, or they'll say things like, you don't know love until you've had a child, or it's the most amazing thing that you'll ever do. And it's like, you can know all of that without having children. And I think it's just, that just adds to that pain and grief that someone may be feeling that we don't even realize. Mm.
And it's one of those where people say it because they want to help. People want to fix what they don't understand and what they don't know. And they see somebody else potentially in pain. So they're like, oh, have you tried this or have you done that? And all those things that you said, and yet it's something that actually could make you feel so much worse without even meaning to.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Definitely. And there's probably a lot of people that are on the fence. Do I want children or not have children? And almost like feeling this pressure that I should. And it's like, that's not a healthy, having children is a huge decision, isn't it? And I think um, feeling pressure from external sources rather than being able to do what feels right for you and your relationship and your situation, I think it's acknowledging that as well.
Mm.
Mm.
I'm so curious about your journey because it is something that it's painful and it's difficult and it's hard, and yet you're here and you're surviving, and I hope that you're thriving. So
Mhm.
when you got to that point where your husband and you said, okay, it's either now or never, and you really made that decision, how did you sort of reconcile saying, I guess we are not having children?
Mhm. I think it was like there's been a lot of reflection on that moment. I think there was a lot of grief that we didn't even really realize was there. And it wasn't until I connected with the childless community did I actually even acknowledge that. So um, we tried to have children biologically for a short while and realized that wasn't going to happen. And we decided immediately that we wanted to try adoption rather than going down the IVF road. And there was a fairly low success rate for IVF. So we thought we'd try adoption. And we were in that process for about 5 years. And that's a long journey as well, we can talk about. But I think we sort of got to a point that we realized emotionally we couldn't continue on that journey. Part of our reason for deciding to adopt rather than go through IVF also was the emotional roller coaster that is. And we had friends who'd been through that, and we were just like, do we want to go through that? And my husband's a very emotional person. And I knew he'd really struggle with it. Like I can probably go through the processes, but I didn't want, like I could feel how it might impact our relationship, and adoption for us felt like something we could do together. It's like being pregnant together because you're going to the psychology visits together and workshops and doing paperwork together. So it was a very um, like it's like a partnership type process. And but that process got harder and harder. There's in Australia and New Zealand, um, it's done through the government, so it's not, we don't have private adoptions. So there's a lot of paperwork, and there's a lot that you have to go through. Sort of you have to be sort of trained and assessed, and there's only certain countries you can adopt from. Um, Adoption inside Australia and New Zealand is there's quite a few, like very few adoptions within like Australia. We were living in Australia at the time, we're now in New Zealand. Um, so it's quite limited, and then there's a lot of criteria about what countries you can adopt from and what age children you can adopt from, and health conditions and religion, and like so many different factors. And it just got to a point that it was just too hard. Like we were seeing, there's always been corruption with adoption that, we see in the media and that sort of thing. And there's been a lot of work to prevent that. But we could see a little bit of it in certain countries as well. And so we had been approved to adopt from Thailand. And then we actually went on a holiday to Thailand. And, we're on holiday thinking about the fact that we're adopting children from Thailand, and all the things that come with that, of thinking of how you want to decorate your house and books you might want to buy and like things like that. So you're sort of really thinking about this child or children that you're going to bring home. And then we got home from that holiday and found out that Thailand had closed their adoption program. And so we were out. Yes, I'd just done that like the month while we were on holidays. And so we'd been approved and then closed, and our application was no longer in there. And then we, after that, we applied to adopt from Colombia. And then they had a similar thing. They closed their program after a year or two because of corruption in the program. And so it's sort of like getting to this point that it's just like there's this corruption. And then our next option was Chile. And we were just hearing stories coming out of Chile where, someone would apply to adopt a baby, but then they'd be allocated a 10-year-old. And it's really hard, like after many years of going through that process, people don't necessarily turn that away because they're just like, I just wanted a child, and there's a child in need, and potentially people are adopting children that they weren't prepared for or with special needs, and that can be a beautiful thing too.
But
But
like you said, when you're prepared for it.
yeah, yeah, and it feels sort of a little bit like you're being pushed into something you don't necessarily want to do, or you're not sure that you're comfortable to do. And at that time, my sister had just had her second baby that was a month old. So we just decided we'd move, and we pretty much just uprooted our life. We sold our business, we sold our house, um, we moved interstate, started new jobs. So I think at the time it was just more like, we're no longer doing this, let's start afresh.
Mhm.
But then I think it took us a number of years of like finding our feet again and feeling a little bit lost, and not feeling content in where we were living and the work we were doing. And I think it took some time once we moved again to realize that there was some grief there, and that grief of um, insecurity. And it's interestingly for me personally, like even career wise, how that feeling of like we worked really hard for something and it didn't happen, and then how that story repeats itself in other aspects of your life, like career and business and writing books and things, and that little story comes through. Like we tried really hard and we didn't. The outcome wasn't what we hoped it would be. Um, and I think that's a big lesson we've learnt. That there's no guarantees in life. You don't control the outcome of things, but um, it's still worth giving things a go. And so I suppose for us, it was like shifting our whole mindset really, and the lessons we learnt from that, acknowledging that we were going through grief, and deciding for ourselves how we wanted to live our life. Like it's almost like there's this hole where you thought, you were thinking that it was going to be children in your life. We'd had this 4-bedroom house. We'd had the chicken and the dog, and we'd sort of really set ourselves up for children. And I think particularly with adoption, there's you're having psychology visits, and they're asking you, is your kitchen baby safe, and assess your light switches and things that you would do if you had a newborn baby, and then they go into the toddler phase, and
Right.
now
You
you've
have a
got a
little more
teenager
time
in the
to
house.
prepare for those sorts of things.
Yeah, but we're almost thinking, oh, what would happen if we had a baby or a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old, or and like even with the psychology, we were being assessed on what would we do if we had an 18-year-old, and they kids were cheating or stabbing each other. Like there was just so many assessments that we
Wow.
were doing, that was like we had really had to think like, what would a child in our life be like?
Mm.
And so once we stopped that process, it's like there's this big hole there, um, and it was something that we really wanted, but then realizing, what do we want? Like, what do we want in our life? And like, I suppose starting on a new path, um, and finding, new projects and passions and adventures and things like that as well. Mm.
It's really amazing that you guys, at least from what you've described so
Mm.
far, feel like you're more bonded together, because I know that there are certainly a lot of times going through surrogacy, going through even when a couple has multiples and they're not expecting it, or something gets a wrench thrown in whatever their plans are, and a lot of times people drift apart and there's a lot of divorce involved. But it sounds like you guys really banded together and said, we're whatever the outcome is, we're in this together, and that's how we're going to face this.
Mm. I think so. I think we decided that fairly early on.
Mhm.
So the reason we couldn't have children is because of my husband, and he had a hernia when he was a baby, and his mum remembered it, but it was sort of forgotten because it was, he was 1 year old, and at the time the surgeon said he may be infertile, like they could have caused damage to his piping when he was a
That
little
is
baby.
huge. That's sort
Huge,
of like a,
yeah.
yeah, by the way.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And so I think because it was his issue, and that he is an emotional sort of person, and I think pretty early on it was like, this is a decision we're making together, because I could biologically have children, um, and so for me to be honest about what I was comfortable with, that like that there's no resentment or um, like it's taking that off the cards, if you know what I mean. Like for me to
Right.
just accept this is his
You fell in love with
issue.
him because of who he is, not because
Yeah,
of what he
yeah.
was going to give you as a child. Like that's
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
it's a hard
yeah,
thing to understand, but it's at the same time like one of the easiest things to say.
yeah, yeah. And so I think it's making that conscious decision that we want to be together, whether we have children or not have children, and that we wanted to form a family together. And that was sort of why we decided on adoption. Um, and I think open communication, but I can definitely see how it can tear a relationship apart as well. And I think we had seen a few friends do that. And so I think we sort of almost entered it with an awareness that that's a potentiality on this journey. So it was sort of like I think because we were aware of that, um, put things in place to like that open communication, and that it
Mm,
wasn't just felt like one person's driving this or one person's emotional or one person's cold. And like it, because it can even sort of fall into that without even realizing that it's happening. But I think
right.
being aware and talking about it beforehand really helped us.
Is there anything else, even during the process, that you think might have helped? Because I think open communication is huge. One of the things my husband and I always say is that I love him, and I've been with him now for over 14 years. It'll be 14 years marriage in August and then dating longer, obviously. But it's one of those where we always say we're so grateful for the early time that we had together because our relationship was long distance. So we really got to know each other as an individual and over the phone, and it was very much an intellectual relationship before it was anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And we also understand that we're not each other's everything, right? Like I still have my
Mm-hmm.
best friend. I still have my girls that I hang out with, and I love hanging out with my kids. So my husband is definitely not my all and everything, but that
Mm-hmm.
open communication is so important. Was there anything else as you were going through it that you said, okay, like this could be a trigger? Should we, I know you said you shut down your career and you sold your business and you moved to a different place. Were there other steps that you said, okay, this is definitely helping us to stay together versus like this is a really rough period right now?
Not really. Like I don't think in our relationship we particularly went through a rough period, but obviously, like if one of us wanted to stay in our house and not move, and the other did, then it was probably that we both wanted the same thing, and we wanted to journey along that same path. And I think that's
Mm,
sometimes a hard thing with a relationship is there can be points when you realize now we want to go in different directions. And that's, you can still love someone, but realize we're on different paths and we want different things.
mm,
So I think that was just like that's just a fortunate thing that we wanted the same thing. Um, and yeah, I think the communication, but I think also we really had a focus on like who we are and what we want as individuals. Like when you talked about you and your husband, like um, having time for yourself, and you're not sort of like that sort of dependence on each other. Because I think it's sometimes I've had people contact me, from some of my blogs and stuff, and some of the stuff I've written, and they're like, now what do we do? Like I'm just sitting in an empty house staring at my husband. What do we do with our
right.
lives?
And you've
And I
got your
think
4 bedrooms, or you've prepared and you've gotten, your room ready for the child that you're potentially bringing home. And then
yeah,
what?
yeah, yeah. And I think, obviously there's grief, and it's allowing yourself to have that grief, and being able to grieve together. Like I think, um, and not feeling alone or not hiding stuff from each other. So that's where the communication is. But I think also remembering that we are individuals with passions and interests and things that are lighting us up. And so I think being able to acknowledge that in each other, like what were some of his dreams, and some of my dreams that we could now go off and do and support each other in.
Mm,
So for him, like he had swimming adventures and some travel adventures. And for me, like I wanted to write books and I went back to university. And so it was sort of like starting again. Like it's almost like you're back in your 20s, and it's like, oh, what do you want to do with your life? And
Nice.
it's
Right.
um and supporting each other's dreams and things like that. And again, like with a little bit of an understanding now of like we don't know what the outcome is. And when you're like 20 and you go to university, you think, oh, I'm doing this degree to get this job and this will happen and then everything will be great. And like we know that that's not how life works. So you're sort of approaching all of that from a different place without that sort of same level of pressure and more of a
Mm,
focus on enjoying the process, enjoying it, watching each other grow and do what they love and giving each other the space to do that.
I love
Um,
that.
and I think maybe sometimes with grief, it can feel like, um, it's okay to be in grief, um, but finding those joyful moments and encouraging someone to sort of get out and find things. And I think sometimes we can feel like joy and grief can't coexist, and that if something's tragic or incredibly sad or a loss, that we can feel really guilty or stepping out of that for a moment and having a laugh or finding beauty or those sorts of things. And I think holding on to that stuff is just so important to remind us that there's still life, there's still hope, there's still beautiful things in the world, there's still things that are interesting to you, um, even if you're in the grief. But it's just giving you like these little glimmers of
Hmm.
potentiality for a future. Um, and I think that's probably what was helpful and supporting each other in that. And like if I had a project and because I've written a number of books since then, and having him to remind me, it's about the process. We know that, outcomes aren't guaranteed. Like I love to see you feeling like lit up and energized after you've written. And so like really supporting each other and noticing those sorts of things about each other and encouraging them. And I think that's for someone that's in grief, it's almost like, how do I like noticing those things and reminding them, oh, I really loved seeing your face lit up when you saw that flower or that puppy. And it's reminding someone that there is joy still in the world. Mm.
I think after I had the miscarriage, I've never felt the dichotomy of feeling two emotions all at the same time more so, where you're right. I was in this grief and really stuck for a little while. And then the first time I remembered feeling joy, it like took me back. And I was like, oh, it is possible to feel these two very different emotions all at the same time. And I shouldn't
Mm.
feel guilty for that. Like I'm still in grief, but I can still enjoy these moments.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think, we've had a recent journey. My husband was diagnosed with cancer 18 months ago. He's had surgery and everything's fine now. But obviously we had that whole, um, what's the outcome going to be? Has it metastasized? That we had the surgery. And it was just a reminder of, there was a lot of grief while we're waiting for diagnosis to come through. But you can have grief or you can I remember we were sitting in the waiting room waiting to find out if it was cancer or not. And I don't even remember what I was reading to my husband, but we were just cracking up laughing. And like
People are
I was
looking at
really,
you probably like, what in the world?
I know, they're in this room waiting to find out if he has cancer, and they're just like tackling their heads off. Um, but it is like you can hold two emotions at the same time, and it is being able to just laugh. Like someone can be in a hospital bed and we can laugh. And even though we're feeling sad at the same time, or we're feeling lost and confused, or what is the point? Like we can feel all of that and still laugh or be cute or affectionate and those sorts of things. So I think it's allowing ourselves all of those emotions, and not
100%.
feeling guilty. Yeah, yeah, for
I
sure.
also want to go
Mm.
back to something that you had brought up about finding a village of people that were also childless, because one of the things that I think is so key in anything that you're going through is creating that village. I'm Jewish, and so one of the things that's very important is that you surround yourself with community. It's literally in every aspect of the Torah, and it's in every aspect of Jewish life. And I put that
Mhm.
into all the different perspectives of my life to say to get through pregnancy, I needed a village. To get through having a miscarriage, I need a village. To get through a friend or, somebody else passing away, you need a village. So tell me more about how you found this village of women and I'm assuming husbands, to be
Mhm.
able to help you create that.
Mm. I totally agree with you with finding a village, because I think with so many things we feel alone, and especially things that aren't talked about. We think we're the only ones going through it, and that can just make it so much more enormous and heavy and
And it's
hard to carry.
isolating.
Yeah, and the isolation. And so it's interesting for me, like we, we're at an age where so many of our friends are having children, and so um, we'd met people through the adoption process that sort of understood what we were going through. And there was a few there that had children, but could understand what we were going through and were very intentional about maintaining our friendship and not it being, baby talk all the time, because that's just can be really quite hard. But it was actually like, 3 to 4 years after we stopped the adoption process that I actually met a lady who was in her 50s, and she was childless. And it was through meeting her that I realized there was a whole childless community out there. Like I hadn't really looked for it, and I hadn't even really thought about it. Like I knew that I wanted to connect with more people that were childless. I had a lot of friends, in my 30s that were in their 50s whose children were leaving home. And I always felt like a connection to people that didn't have children, or people that children were leaving home and they were sort of refinding themselves, without children. Because to me, it's almost like even for people that have children, there's a sense of loss when they leave home, and
Mhm.
now you're at home on your own and thinking, what do I want to do? And I almost felt like I was sort of in that boat a little bit. Like we didn't have the children, but I was at that phase of, okay, so children didn't happen. Now what do I want to do with my life? So I did connect with sort of women in that age bracket a little bit more, who were, like going out and um, doing different workshops, like art workshops and things like that, that are all sort of trying to refine themselves. And so I met this woman who told me about the childless community and sort of started connecting me with books and podcasts, and it just opened my eyes to the fact that this was a community. There was like meetups, and probably for a few years, I was very intentional about sort of going to that sort of stuff and connecting with people, listening to podcasts, and as you say, just not feeling alone in that journey. Like now, I don't feel I need it so much, but it's nice to have friends that don't have children and get what that's like. So I am sort of intentional in that, but it was probably a few years just being part of that childless community and knowing that there's other people out there. Like even just to know that it's a huge percentage of the population won't have children, because I think sometimes it's like, what will happen if I don't? And I'll be an old lady on my own, without a family around me, and then realizing there's actually going to be lots of people in that same position. And how do we create family ourselves, whether it's with people with children or without children? But it's like creating our own family, and support network as well.
Mhm.
Mm.
I love that. And I think that being able to, like I mean, we've talked about the finding your village. Like it's whatever that village looks like is up to you to figure out and up to you to discover.
Mm, mm, mm. And I think there's probably a period of time where it was really, and I suppose it would be like, as you say, it's the pregnancy classes that you go to, and then it's the mothers group, before they go to school. I think it's just different periods of our life where we need different connections.
Right. And
Um,
sometimes it's with the same people as you grow, and sometimes it's with different people. And I think like
yeah,
it's very charming to be able to cultivate those different villages for each different cycle in your life.
mm, I think so. And I've had a bit to do with, as I said, like lots of women that I befriend who had teenage children, and sometimes they would feel really alone because they were part of the school network and they'd pick up each other's kids and help each other out. But then some of those friends that they thought were friends, it was just for that period, that cycle of life. And
Right.
now it's finding new friends. so that, yeah, sometimes we can maintain friendships our whole lives, and other times it's forming new ones for when we're ready for the next chapter of our lives.
Right.
Mm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So now that you're a little bit removed and you said it's been a few years, you've written books, you have a blog. What are you doing in that world to, I guess, not focus on it all the time because you don't certainly want to make it into everything, but it sounds like it's still a huge part of your life and being able to help others, which is phenomenal.
Mm. I think so. Like, I think it's still, there's still an emotional twinge, you know, when around not having children. And I think that's another thing about grief. It's almost like we think we work through it and then we're fine and it's all over. But it's like
No, it's
any
still
loss,
there.
it's still there, and there's little twinges where it comes up, and they can be sad moments or joyful moments. Like even at work, like I work with people with eating disorders in a residential facility, and so you build in close connections. And you know, um, they'd written like "We Are Family," and then underneath they'd put my name. And like they're having a bit of a joke with me and calling me little nicknames and stuff. And it was just really cute because it's like for me, like it was quite an emotional thing to even see that they'd written "We'd Family" and put my name underneath it. And so yeah, I think um, there's sort of, yeah, those twinges of grief and loss that continue to come up. Um, Now I've lost my train of thought.
What else have you been doing since?
Yeah. And I think just doing things, oh, so that was what I was talking about. So I think there's the processing of it. Like I think it continues as well, that it's processing childlessness in lots of different ways. And so like I find the writing has been one, processing it sort of like in a memoir type way, like my experience and how it felt and my perspective and reflections and stuff like that, but also like being able to bring it into fiction has enabled me to explore it from a few different angles. And I think um, I'm still drawn to thinking about it and contemplating it. It's like being an elderly woman without children, or working with people with eating disorders that may not be able to have children because their eating disorder has extended, for quite a period of time. They may have caused some permanent damage. So it's almost like for me, exploring the range of people that might experience childlessness and how that can look, and to feel less alone. So it's something that I'm still interested in exploring.
Mhm.
And I think, yeah, it comes up in a lot of my work in different ways. Mm.
Are your books available internationally?
Yes, yes.
Fantastic. Where can we find
Yeah,
them?
yeah. So they are on like Amazon and my website as well. And my second book, The Tears of a Woman, we were talking before about like the joyful, like finding joy. And in that, the second book, The Tears of a Woman, so it's a sequel to the first book. And I hadn't really planned on writing about our story. Um, but the character was, in her late 30s. She just in a relationship. It sort of felt right that I could bring in this adoption story and bring that in, because it was like I hadn't even really realized when I was writing the story how much childlessness I was bringing in, because it was like I'm in my 30s, I'm single, I don't have kids, you know, who am I? And so I hadn't even realized how much the childlessness I was bringing into that story. And then to bring in our story into the sequel, so they sort of went through a similar journey of trying to adopt. And in the story, I have her finding joy in flower arranging, and she ends up becoming a florist. And when we were talking before about like finding the joyful things, it's been interesting to have people read that book because it's quite sad, but then there's like moments, it's sort of like a wave of like we're in grief, and then we find this moment of connection or joy or beauty. And so, it's the way they nurture each other or hold each other's hands or enjoy a beautiful meal and, smell of coriander or something, the way she goes to flower arrange, or She might go and collect flowers and she might have a little cry, but it's like reminding herself of the joy in life, and then how that sort of threads through the book. And that's sort of really how it ends. It's like coming to a place of acceptance, but there still can be love and joy in your
Mhm.
life, even when there's loss. Mm. Mm.
Wow. I
Yeah, so
think
they're on my
it sounds like a
website.
powerful story.
Yeah, yeah. It's beautiful. It was such a cathartic thing to write for myself, but um, I think it's a beautiful story for anyone who's been through something similar to ourselves, like a childless journey or any sort of struggles to have children. But I think it's also a really powerful way for people that have never been through anything like this to understand what it might be like to go through it. So, there's things, people providing her unsolicited advice or asking her what's going on, or even just like one of the things that we, realize we probably shouldn't have done is like you tell people that you're adopting, and then, then they, every time they see you, they ask you, how's it going? And, by year 4, year 5, you're just like, oh my God, I just don't even want that question. And you can sort of almost get to the point that you're like, I don't even want to go to the supermarket or library, or I don't want anyone to see me because I know I'm going to get this question. And so even just um, raising like, how does that feel for someone? Um, and I don't necessarily in the novel, go into like what you might say instead, but I think it's just that awareness of um, how someone might be feeling and how they might be interpreting what you're saying, and how we can be a bit more gentle and curious with our language when someone's going through something, rather than the how's your adoption going, and you're just thinking, oh, like it's not going
Ah,
anywhere,
right.
or
How much
yeah,
time
yeah,
do you have? Do you want
yeah,
the
yeah.
honest answer? Do you want the made up answer to make everybody feel happy?
Yeah, 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 yeah. And it's almost like even when people ask you, do you have kids? It's like, yeah, it feels a bit like, do you want the long answer or the short answer? Because
Right.
sometimes the quick no is interpreted as, well, you didn't want kids and what's wrong with you.
Right.
Um, yeah, so sometimes I might just say, it just didn't happen for us, and say it in a way that someone gets a hint that there's more to that story. And if they want to ask, they can ask. But um, just trying to minimize the unsolicited advice or opinions that you sometimes get as well. Mm.
It's so funny because I feel like in every part of life, people
Mm.
offer that unsolicited advice. And it's one of those where maybe as I've gotten older, I've tried to just listen as opposed to always think that I can solve something. And
Mm.
there was a podcaster I listened to once who said that whenever his wife comes home in a bad mood, he'll say, "Before you tell me the problem, I need to know, am I helping you or am I just listening?" And
Mm-hmm.
I think if there's more of that understanding between people to just say, you don't need to solve everything. I'm not talking to you because I need your advice. I'm not talking to you because I'm asking for anybody's opinion. I just need to almost talk to hear what it sounds like, and then I'll
Mm-hmm.
see how I feel. But people, like I said before, people just need to feel like they're helping. And so that unsolicited advice, even, I mean, as somebody who is pregnant, you get it all the time. As somebody who maybe needs to lose weight or gain weight, you get it. Like it's not just in that childless atmosphere. It's really people just want to help solve your problems and they don't even know what the problem necessarily is before they're starting to try and solve it.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I know like my husband and we do sort of sometimes, like I'll be talking and I'll be like, this is not a fix it problem. This is I need to talk about it problem.
Right,
Um, because yeah, like often we just talk about something and we solve it, or just let it off our chest, and now we feel lighter from having talked about it.
right.
Um, and so yeah, but I think that idea of like coming in with advice, and I think, yeah, as you say, like I think with time we start to realize everyone's life is so different, and the path they take and what's, right or wrong in quotations of for that individual, we realize that there's just so many different ways that we can live a life, um,
And whatever
and we're
options
so
you end up
individual.
taking or not taking are totally personal. So for somebody to come in and say, like you're telling them your story, and for specifically, I'm thinking about what you said earlier, where they're like, well, did you try this? And did you try adoption? Did you try IVF? You're like, yeah, what makes you think I didn't? Like, why these questions? I get you're trying to connect, but this is not the right way.
Mm, mm. And it's interesting that you said that and you use that example of weight, because that's my interest, as I'm a nutritionist as well. And like I work with disordered eating, and two of my books really focus on body acceptance and a lot of that weight stigma that we have, that we just assume, oh, someone's in a larger body, they must want to lose weight, and that's the best, healthiest thing that they can do. This assumption that we put on people rather than understanding who they are, what their health is, what are their priorities. Like,
And
yeah, we
same
just
thing
sort of
for somebody
see,
who's skinny too. For somebody who's skinny, you
yeah,
automatically assume like, oh, they're happy in their body. They must be at the weight that they want to be at, whereas they could have a whole slew of health problems.
absolutely. And there's mental health and physical health. And so,
Right.
yeah, it's just so much we make assumptions about people. And I think sometimes, particularly as women, we'll complain about things, or, our work, and we're just letting off some steam and trying to process it. But it's like, I'm not saying my job sucks, and I need to get the hell out of there. I
Right.
just need to tell you about my shitty day, and
Right.
I think that's sometimes the thing, is that it's like, and, people do that, they talk about their kids, and it's like complaining about this and going on, like, it's just, I just need to let off some steam, and now I've got it out. It's all cool. I just needed
Right.
to let that go. And I think, yeah, it's acknowledging that from other people, isn't it? That I don't need your advice. I just would like you to listen to me.
Right. Right. And I'll
Mm.
do the same. Like when I'm done, by all means, you take the stage. I have no
Yeah,
problem with
yeah,
that.
for sure.
Yeah. So now that you've got a whole slew of books, you do blogs, you've been working with people and helping them with their health mentally and physically, where can people find you who might not live in New Zealand who want to connect?
So I have a website, which is joyfuleatingnutrition.com. And so from there, you can link to my Facebook and Instagram. And I write recipes as well as blogs around self-acceptance and body image. And I've shared a number of blogs around our childlessness journey as well. And happy to connect to people if they want to email or whatever. And the books are all listed on there as well. And as I said, they're on Amazon and other online bookstores and stuff like Kobo Books and stuff like that as well. So they can find stuff there
Perfect. And
also.
if you could give one parting piece of advice to anybody, whether it's in health or the childless journey or any of it, what would that be?
Mm. I think that we never know the outcome of what we're going through and the process. And so finding joy in that process, I think is really important. And even when we're in grief or struggling, like really prioritizing trying to find those joyful moments and reminding ourselves of what lights us up, I think is really, really important. And that, like, I think that's really interesting. I talk a lot about acceptance and accepting of what is. And that can be really, really hard, accepting the outcome of, the hard work we've put in, and whatever that might be, whether that's children or it's loss or it's career or it's relationship, those sorts of things. But I think there's things that happen in life, and allowing ourselves a space to grieve and to feel all of our feelings, and not feeling the guilt and shame of, is grief, how long should I be grieving for? And should I be feeling joy in grief? And I suppose second guessing and questioning ourselves. I think just being on the ride and accepting what comes along. Mm.
And it sounds like also giving yourself grace to be able to go through it.
Definitely, yeah. I think the time frames and so many things that we impose on ourselves, like how long should I be in grief, and when should I be over this, and what does that look like? And it's like, well, actually, it's going to be so different for everyone, and it's not like there's an end point where you say, I'm done. It's, as we said
Right.
before, like
Check
it's
the box.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But I think sometimes it's almost a little bit like that. And particularly with childlessness, it's almost like, well, if you didn't want kids or it didn't happen, why can't you just close that box and forget about it? But it's like you really can't. Like, it's still a loss. It's still a scar that you carry. And there's still many moments in your life where that scar is tenderized, like you're seeing other people playing with their children, or there's people with grandchildren, and there's just so I think that sometimes we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to feel a certain way or to get somewhere by a certain time frame. So as you say, like, it's allowing ourselves the grace to ride that out for however long that takes,
Right.
and giving ourselves the care that we need along that journey. Mm.
I love it. I think it's the perfect ending to the conversation.
Good. Thank you. This has been awesome to chat with you.
Yeah, Tansy, it's been a pleasure. I'm so glad that you reached out, and I'm excited to look up your books and see if I can get some sent over here.
Excellent. That'd be great.
Thank you for joining me today on Pushing Through Loss. I hope this episode has provided support, understanding, and a sense of community. Remember, you are not alone on your journey, and you have the strength to face the challenges that come your way. If you found value in today's conversation, please leave me a review and consider sharing it with others who may benefit. Together, we can help each other heal and activate our inner strength warriors. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations, and until next time, you got this.